Another edition of Greatest Calls Bracket Interviews. Very fortunate to be joined by Jerry Howarth, the longtime voice of the Toronto Blue Jays. Spent 36 years calling their games before retiring after the 2017 season. Jerry, I know you're still in Toronto. You haven't left there in, 39 years now. How are you and everyone doing, all your family, during this difficult time?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Jack. And my wife Mary and I and our two boys and three young grandsons are all doing well, and I couldn't believe it when the other day I realized I have now lived in Canada 39 years, growing up in the States 35 years. I'm 74, and if somebody would have told me you'll live more years outside the U.S. than in it, I would have said no way, but we're very happy. I've enjoyed my retirement with my family. I also play a lot of duplicate bridge with partners, and it's online now with the COVID-19, but having a very good time day by day, enjoying every moment.
For listeners, I just want to make it known, Jerry is a Santa Clara alum. I'm a Santa Clara alum. We've got that in common right away, so always great to talk to a fellow Bronco. Jerry, your longtime partner on the radio, Tom Cheek, is featured in the Greatest Calls bracket. You had a few calls that were in the running as well, but Tom has advanced to the bracket. He's into the Sweet 16 now. His call of Joe Carter's World Series winning home run in 1993 in Game 6 against Mitch Williams and the Philadelphia Phillies to win back-to-back World Series is featured. And how about this? It's up against Dan Schulman, a fellow Toronto guy, who in his call of David Freese's walk-off home run. Let me just play the call real quick for all the listeners, and then we can dive into the details, the background, and, of course, your relationship with Tom over the years.
Joe has had his moments trying to lay off that ball low to the outside part of the plate, and he just went after one. 2 balls and 2 strikes on it. Here's the pitch on the way, a swing and a belt, left field, way back, Blue Jays win it! The Blue Jays are World Series champions as Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run in the 9th inning, and the Blue Jays have repeated as World Series champions. Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
It's one of just 2 home runs to finish off a World Series. Bill Mazeroski's home run in Game 7 against the Yankees in 1960 being the other for the Pirates. This one comes 33 years later. Take me through what first comes to mind for you.
Well, it's an amazing story because there's so much involved, and I wasn't in the booth. I was down right near the dugout ready for the post-game interview, and when Tom started that clip you just heard talking about Joe and having a little trouble with that down and outside pitch, Mitch Williams had just thrown him a pitch down and away, and Joe had swung over it, didn't look good doing it, and the count now is 2-2. Now the rest is history, as they say. First of all, when at the end you hear that iconic touch 'em all, Joe, you'll never hit a bigger home run in your life. If people see the home run, as Joe hits it, he's going down the first base line, jumping up and down, knowing that there's a very good chance it's going to clear the wall. It's fair by plenty. And as he goes jumping up and down toward first base, that's at the end when Tom says, very eloquently but spontaneously as well, touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life, because he didn't want Joe to be jumping up and down over the bag and miss it and have later that home run denied. So that was a very spontaneous call, and I've always told broadcasters, be spontaneous. Don't rehearse it. Be spontaneous. That's the best spontaneous call I've ever heard in that situation. Second thing is, my wife Mary is with his mom, and Mary says, Mrs. Carter, what do you think? And she says, my son, the kangaroo. It was the line of the post game, because there he is jumping up and down like a kangaroo. Thirdly, which is fantastic, and you just talked a little bit about it, Bill Mazeroski walks off the first ever World Series home run, Game 7, Forbes Field, Pittsburgh, 1960. The shortstop for the Pirates was Dick Schofield. What are the odds that only the second time after that a home run would walk off a World Series happened 33 years later, Joe Carter, and the starting shortstop for the Blue Jays that year was Dick Schofield Jr., yes, Dick's son, broke his arm in May. He's in uniform at the end of the season. He's there in the dugout in uniform. He goes to home plate and celebrates that walk-off home run. A father and son are part of Major League Baseball history that's only happened twice. That is why I always loved the game of baseball for so many reasons, but history and trivia just like that.
I did some reading about it. It's one of the amazing, I think one of the amazing baseball trivia questions of all time, right?
Yes, it is. It's only happened twice, and a father and son were both part of it, and both in uniform and both in the celebration. It was just a fantastic moment, and those are the kind of moments too that just happen. And remember, that was Game 6. If it doesn't happen, it goes to Game 7. Now, here's one more great story. Behind home plate, as you go up the stands, there's a concourse. And as Joe hits the home run, this couple, a little older couple, everybody's hugging one another, and so they hug one another. And the gentleman backs up and he looks at her and he says, "You are so happy. Look at you. You just have so much joy in your smile." And she says, "My name is Marcia Henkin. Pat is my son. If this game goes to the Phillies, he was going to pitch Game 7 tomorrow night, and now he doesn't have to." And she then says to him, "You look pretty happy too." And he says, "My name is Bud Molitor. I'm Paul's father. Paul was on base. I couldn't watch either." And that was the first time those two had ever met.
It just gets better. That is incredible. So, Jerry, one thing I wanted to bring up to it, and we'll get into Tom here in just a second, and I want to talk to you about the game, but this moment for Toronto and for Canada, this was obviously a second straight World Series appearance. It ended up being a second straight World Series title. But to do it at the Sky Dome, and now, of course, it's the Rogers Center, what do you remember most about the environment during that game and of course, the celebration and the aftermath? Because it's one thing to win. I believe you guys won in Atlanta the year before. It's one thing to win there. It's another thing to win in front of all those crazy and obsessed fans over there in Toronto.
Well, that's exactly right. And the year before, the Blue Jays had won it in Game 6 in extra innings, and so that was their first ever World Series championship, and Tom was at the mic to call that one. And now it comes back to next year, and lo and behold, the Blue Jays are right back in it. And what I remember was just bedlam, pandemonium, the crowd noise, the enthusiasm, the chance to celebrate this at home. And remember, the year before was the first time the World Series had ever been won outside of the U.S., and now it happens a second straight time. And the joy, for me being down on the field and watching the players and the coaches and the manager all smile, and the joy and how much that just radiated throughout the entire ballpark, it was just unbelievable. And it was history in the making, too, back-to-back World Series, and that doesn't happen too often. And here, we talk about expansion teams, and the Seattle Mariners came into existence with the Blue Jays in 1977. They've never been to a World Series, so the joy was just second to none, and I was just happy to be a part of it, because what you do is step back, and I was on the field, and even downtown, the noise was just incredible, and that's when you soak it all in, because it's very rare when it happens.
Tom Cheek is up against Dan Schulman in this round, which is an incredible matchup in itself for so many different reasons. But I asked Dan about the call from his perspective, and we'll get into him in just a second and his relationship with the Blue Jays and with you and with Tom. And Dan was saying, in a sense, that Tom almost beat himself up a little bit over the call in 1992, because even though fundamentally, and I listened back to that call a couple times too, it's a great call. I believe it was a ground ball, final out. Did you ever sense him kind of having a feeling like that?
Well, it was in Game 6 when Tom was at the mic. Otis Nixon bunted up along first base, and Timlin fielded it, Mike Timlin. Due to Joe Carter, who was at first base, he'd come in from the outfield to play first base. There was no DH, of course, in the National League. And that's when Tom made the final call, bunted ball, Timlin to Carter, and the Blue Jays win the World Series. Blue Jays win the World Series.
Timlin to the belt. Pitch on the way, and there's a bunted ball. First base side, Timlin to Carter, and the Blue Jays win it. The Blue Jays win it. The Blue Jays are World Series champions. So Canada, let it all out. It's party time.
I was again down on the field, so I did not hear that until later. Well, now with about a month to go during the season of 1993, much like Dan, Tom shared that with me privately, that he just was hoping to have an opportunity to call another World Series win. And I said, well, you already did it once. And then he told me he just wasn't that happy with his call, and one thing led to another, and he was disappointed, and it surprised me. I was just so stunned that Tom had carried that with him, all the happiness and joy again, my favorite word, that went with calling that first World Series. So
Sure.
it was meant to be for Tom to call it. And the nice thing is that here we are talking. Tom passed away October the 9th of 2005. But at least he had that second opportunity to make this call that you're now talking about here with Dan Schulman, and something that later, when you look back at his life, I'm so happy that he had not only the opportunity to do it, but called it so spontaneously, as I had mentioned, and then be able to say, wow, that was a call that I'll always remember. And that's what made me so happy for him and his family.
And that's one of the great stories as well about all of this, too. The fact that he had a chance to do it again and to have that moment and for him to be behind the mic for it. Let me ask you, too, about the game itself. This is just a wild game. I think a lot of people overlook the Blue Jays. If I recall, they score 3 in the first. They're up, 5-1 in the fifth inning or the sixth inning, and then the Phillies have a 5-run inning, and it becomes a 6-5 deficit for the Blue Jays. That was just a roller coaster ride of a game. What do you recall about that part of it?
Well, the best story of all, and you're right, the game, right now the Phillies are ahead, and it goes to the bottom of the ninth inning. And Ricky Henderson, who was acquired, in August by Pat Gillick, he's in the dugout, and he's the first one up. He's a leadoff hitter. He's in the dugout. The players told me this later. They said, Jerry, you won't believe this. When they opened the right field gate to bring in Mitch Williams, the wild thing, Ricky looks out there. He gets up, and he goes to the end of the dugout toward home plate, and now he comes down the dugout, giving everybody low fives, saying he's going to walk me on 4 pitches. He'll walk me on 4 pitches, and we're going to win this World Series. That is exactly what happened. Ricky went up, Mitch, the wild thing, walked him on 4 pitches, and then later, Joe hits the home run. Now, you talk about destiny, Ricky called it.
Talking with Jerry Howarth, longtime voice of the Toronto Blue Jays, 36 years he spent before retiring after the 2017 season. So to you and Tom and your relationship, you arrive in 1981 on a part-time basis, and then from there, it's 23 years together with Tom, and he ultimately called, since his arrival in 1977, you can tell the story of it, he calls 4,306 consecutive games until the 2004 season. What do you remember most about him as a broadcaster, and then really about your relationship, the two of you on the air over those years?
Well, we had a good friendship. Tom was very gracious to me from the very beginning. I've always told people, too, in the broadcasting industry, especially in radio, opposites make the best teams. Why? Well, number one, their voices are different. Tom had the big baritone voice, big guy, too. And then little Jerry, Tom and Jerry, the little mouse running around, I had the higher voice, the inflection. And so you always knew who was on the radio, and that's a real plus for any broadcast team. Second of all, neither of us were former players. So neither of us did anything other than call the game. We didn't pretend we knew things as a player would know them with insight, etc. We called the game professionally, game in and game out. We prepared differently. We called the game differently. And that was all good because the fans now got Tom and Jerry. Tom and Jerry became iconic up here. And I grew up watching Tom and Jerry. And sure enough, when we were in rooms together, he was the big cat, and I was the little mouse, as I said, running around, and I loved that. Our families got to know each other. We got to know his wife, Shirley, his twin sisters, their kids, and later their grandkids. It was just a wonderful situation. And when the season was over, we went our separate ways, too, and then we came back in spring training. But we did it professionally, and we did it without any ego on our sleeves. We did it for the fans, to inform and entertain those fans, and that's what made Tom and Jerry special year in and year out.
What does Tom mean around Toronto and to the Blue Jays, just because of the run that he had and all the greatness that ensued with it?
Well, legendary. When you're the first announcer with a team, like Dave Niehaus with the Seattle Mariners, you become part of a family, the family being everybody who listens. And in those families, Tom and Early Wynn, the first 5 years, they were the ones who started Blue Jays baseball. And remember, the first 3 years, the Blue Jays lost better than 100 games. Well, now all of a sudden, Jerry comes along, and now with Bobby Cox, the team starts to do better and better, leading to 11 straight seasons where they played 500 ball or better. And that culminated, of course, with 92 and 93 and winning those 2 World Series. But we had such a good time together. But I think when you start to talk about broadcasters and what they're doing, it's got to be a case of you prepare, you do the best that you can, and then you let the results take care of themselves. And so up here, especially when Tom passed away from his cancer, it broke everybody's heart because they were the ones who grew up listening to Tom. And then later, as my career continued and I had former players come in as analysts, young kids then would come up to me and say, Jerry, I grew up listening to you. Well, now you start to go back to 77 and all those people who became Blue Jays fans, Tom Cheek was their Blue Jays voice. And that's what broke their hearts when he passed away. So to this day, Tom is legendary here in Toronto and always will be.
Speaking with Jerry Howarth, the legendary voice of the Toronto Blue Jays, 36 years. He stepped down after the 2017 season. I did want to ask you, Jerry, so you're in the booth in the 2005 season, and you end up calling it until, of course, after 2017. You announced in 2018 during spring training that you're not going to be continuing, but you have your run as the top guy, and without Tom in the booth. What was it like that first game and not having Tom in the booth there with you?
Well, it was different because now all of a sudden, after years of being the second broadcaster, I did 3, 4, 7, and 8. So I was very fortunate to be able to have my boss say, Jerry, I want you to call the 8th inning as well. So I did 4 of the 9 innings. But when Tom passed away, the first couple of broadcasts, you're saying to yourself, well, wait a minute. You've never been in this position before. Let's just take a deep breath and see how we do. And I will say this, and this is what I wanted to do. I had heard Tom for years say, hi, everyone, this is Tom Cheek, Jerry Howarth. And I'd heard other broadcasters say, hello, everybody, this is so-and-so and whatever. But I said to myself, I've been up here in Canada for all these years. These are my friends, too. I'm part of their family. They are friends of mine. So really, the first time I got on the air to help me relax a little bit, I said, hello, friends, this is Jerry Howarth. Welcome to Blue Jays Baseball. And that became my signature call because hello, friends was different than everybody else's hi, everybody, or hello, everyone. It was personal. It was friendly. It was me. And that's why I always tell broadcasters, be you. Don't copy anybody else. Be you. Do what is good for you. Do what makes you happy. That made me happy to be friends with all these people across Canada. And to this day, they are my friends, and they appreciate me, and I appreciate them.
You had a sensational run, one of the legendary voices of all time in baseball, the Jack Guarini Award for Lifetime Contributions. I believe it was in 2012 for the Hall of Fame, and then also the Sports Media Award for Achievement in 2003 alongside Tom individually in 2016. As you look back on your career, whether it's with Tom and then those years without him and then wrapping it up, what are you most proud of over the course of your career?
I think, Jack, just the consistency from day one of preparation, making sure that when I went on the air, I was not only prepared, but I had things to say other than just statistics. I wanted to prepare in a different way. In fact, one of the real reasons why I was able to have the career that I did was my 5 years broadcasting in AAA baseball, in Tacoma for 2 years and Salt Lake for 3. There was no internet. There was no emails. There was nothing. The only way you could prepare, if you wanted to do it right, and this is what, again, I felt comfortable with, was go down on the field 2.5, 3 hours before the game. And I did that for 5 years, broadcasting those games by myself. But when I came up to the booth, I'd already been down on the field, and I would visit with players, managers, coaches, the trainers, the umpires. And I would basically interview them, and they didn't even know they were being interviewed by me. But I was getting to know them, but with a purpose, too, of what he says, I'm taking up to the booth. And those stories I shared not only at the moment, that was the preparation that I was proudest of in my career, that and the consistency of using it every day so that I just didn't plateau in my career. I didn't, and I was proud of that.
2015, I did want to bring up, of course, this bracket, there was a process of going through so many different legendary calls, and the Jose Bautista call was very much in the running. It was close to getting nominated. I did want to play that for people and take you back through that moment a little bit in that call. So here's your call, 2015 ALDS. They're playing the Rangers. We can go through the moment in just a second, but here's the call.
1-1 on Jose. All eyes on the mound and the bearded Sam Dyson. Now he comes set. kicks the 1-1 pitch. Fly ball deep left field. Yes, sir. There she goes.
The legendary "There She Goes" call. Take me through that moment. I know there were many that are near the top of your list, Tom's call being one, this being one, but take me back through that moment a little bit.
Well, for the fans, just quickly, the top of that inning created a lot of controversy where an umpire made a call to have someone go back to third base. The game was, at that particular point, tied, and then the umpire overruled his call, let that runner at third, Rugnit Odor, come home. That sparked kind of a problem with the fans there, 50-some thousand fans. All of a sudden, the Rangers take the lead 3-2 instead of a tie game, and it had to do with Russ Martin throwing the ball back to the mound. He hit the bat in the hand of Shin Soo Choo in the batter's box, a left-handed hitter. Well, anyway, one thing led to another, and they're throwing things on the field and water bottles and beer cans and everything else. It got pretty ugly. Then it goes to the bottom of the inning, and the Blue Jays hit 3 consecutive routine ground balls, all of them booted by the Rangers to load the bases, something I had never seen in my career before. And the reason I'm doing this for the fans here, your listeners, that from the top of the inning to the bottom of the inning, not Jose's home run, but to the bottom of the inning, took 53 minutes to play. 1 inning, 53 minutes. So at the end, and I've always been a broadcaster who lets the crowd come in rather than talk over the crowd. It's something I took great pride in my career. When Bautista took that swing, and now it's 3-3, all of a sudden, 3 ground balls and a little pop-up that brought in a run, 3-3, 2 on. Jose Bautista, with that swing, I just said 5 words. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There she goes, with emphasis. Usually it was up, and there she goes, or there goes another one. But this one was for the 53 minutes. Yes, sir, there she goes. And, Jack, I didn't talk for 40 full seconds, 40, because that crowd was so loud. I didn't want to interfere with the listeners to enjoy the same thing I was enjoying at the ballpark. And that was a call that I took great pride in.
In an environment like that, I feel like that's the testament of a great announcer, letting that wild crowd do their thing on the radio.
Well, that's what it's all about. You have to do that. And the next year in the wild card game, I had the second home run call that I really enjoyed. Edwin comes up in the 11th inning, and fortunately that was my inning. And the winner of that wild card game, Blue Jays happened to host it with Baltimore in town. The winner was going to play the Texas Rangers in Arlington. So when Edwin Encarnacion hit a fly ball deep to left field, much like Bautista, where I knew from the crack of the bat that it was gone, all I said was, yes, sir, the Blue Jays are going to Texas. And again, I didn't talk for 40 seconds.
Fly ball deep left field. Yes, sir, the Blue Jays are going to Texas. Edwin Encarnacion has won it for the Blue Jays 5-2 with a dramatic 11th inning home run into the 200 level here, as he's mobbed by his teammates and a sea of blue down on the field.
And those are the 2 calls that I remember the most for the fans. Not for me, but for the fans and what it meant to the history of Blue Jays baseball.
Talking with Jerry Howarth, the longtime voice of the Toronto Blue Jays, 36 years, retired after the 2017 season, enjoying retirement. He's still in Toronto. I know you're never going to leave now, Jerry. It's been, 39 years, so it's been a while. But I did want to ask you quickly. This, of course, the call that Tom Cheek, his Joe Carter home run call from the 93 World Series to win it, one of 2 World Series clinchers in history, coming via the home run, is featured. It's in the Sweet 16, and it's up against a guy who I know you know well and Tom knew well, and he was a young guy when you first came across him, in Dan Shulman, his call of David Freese's walk-off for the Cardinals in the 2011 World Series in Game 6. Dan has now been with ESPN for a while, and he's been all over the place. But I believe he started off, you can correct me here, he was telling me he started off as an intern at Sportsnet The Fan, I believe it's 590, and he was doing the pregame and the postgame. What do you remember most about Dan in those early years, and what do you say about his work and maybe that call of the David Freese home run?
Well, first of all, Dan Shulman is a class act. I have known him from day one. He has risen to great heights at ESPN, of course, leaving Canada to do that and then come on back here, but a Canadian through and through. Someone who is very unselfish, very unpretentious. It's about other people, modest a superstar broadcaster as you will ever find. He's genuine. He and his wife have a son named Hudson, and I really love the family too. Lauren is one of my great friends. She used to work in the Blue Jays front office, and but Dan is as good as it gets, not only with his work, but as a person. And here's someone, too, who was at Western University just up the way here in London, Ontario, and he was not in sports. I believe he was in marketing and business. And then all of a sudden, his heart jumped, too, like mine did years ago, and he said, you know what, I've got to get into sports. I've got to try this anyway. Went to Barrie, a city just north here, about 50 miles. Started to do some work on the radio, came back, did a little volunteer work on the station that carried the Blue Jays, and one thing led to another, and now he's one of the best broadcasters ever to broadcast games, not just baseball, but basketball too, and but thoroughly through and through one of my best friends, and that's how I can best honor him, by saying he's one of the modest people I've ever met.
Dan Shulman, of course, a Toronto native, so the connection is just great. It's one of those matchups we were talking about. It's a win-win in the sense that you've got a Toronto call, you've got a Toronto guy or a Toronto call or something related to Toronto in there in a sense. Tom, if he gets by Dan, could very well face Vin Scully in the next round and his call of Hank Aaron's 715th home run. And maybe down the road it could be Jack Buck. He's on that side of the bracket as well, and his call of Kirk Gibson's 1988 home run. I guess I'm curious about what you can say about Vin, the person and the broadcaster, Vin Scully, that is, and maybe Jack Buck as well, two legendary baseball voices.
Well, the nice thing, Jack, for me in my career, being down on the field, I got to meet all of them. And it was my pleasure to, first of all, just introduce myself and then listen and gather who they were and the careers that they had. And I've always enjoyed interviewing. It's something that is as important to me as a play-by-play, and I do it off the mic too. And when you do it off the mic, what you're doing is you're just asking someone a simple question, and you're listening to that answer. And then there's a word in there that triggers the next answer. And pretty soon, at the end of 5 or 6 or 7 minutes or whatever, you walk away really having gained an insight into that person. So whether it was Scully or Buck or Harry Carey or so many legendary announcers, Phil Rizzuto comes to mind as well, and Bill White, and I could go with every team right on down the line. I got to know them as people. And then later, when I heard them on the broadcast, I knew who was broadcasting, not just as a broadcaster, but as a person with real feelings and an opportunity to get to know them and their families a little bit. And I took great pride in that. So that was a real part of my career that I thoroughly enjoyed, getting to know these iconic broadcasters as people.
Well, Jerry, I can't thank you enough for your time here. This is by far the longest one of these interviews that I've done so far for this bracket, but it's been a real treat to talk to you and, of course, to talk to a fellow Santa Clara alum and someone who I've greatly admired. I mentioned to you, once I caught hold of your broadcast and a way to listen to the Blue Jays on Sirius, I didn't stop until you stopped. So, hey, I can't thank you enough. Tom Cheek being involved here, I wanted to find a way to get someone closely connected to him, and what better to have the guy who worked with him, of course, the Tom and Jerry connection for 23 years. Hope you and yours and everyone stays safe over there in Toronto, and all the best to you, and thank you so much for doing this.
Jack, my pleasure. Go Broncos, and you're on your way toward your own great career.